Welcome back to Alive at 5. I'm your host, David Leonard, and it's my pleasure to be joined on the phone here this afternoon by Karen Page. Karen is the author of a recently published book entitled My Life Across the Table, Stories from a Psychic's Life, and we're going to spend some time today talking about what it is like to be a professional psychic. This is a lady who's done this for over 40 years, and I wanted to hear her story, and so that's why she's on the program here today. Good afternoon, Karen. Welcome aboard.
Good afternoon, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to spend some time visiting with you.
Thanks.
As we get going here, for a listener out there who maybe has never heard of Karen Page, has no idea who you are or what you're about, please, if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, this was certainly not what I had planned. I don't know where over 40 years has gone. I had planned to be a lawyer, but I always say God saved me from myself and gave me this extraordinary gift instead. And I have clients all over the world. My business card has always said psychic counseling, because it really is some of everything. And it's about your personal life and family and business and what's coming up. I do not focus on people that have passed on. That is not what I do unless they show up in someone's reading. And I usually deal with, when I say immediate past, it's usually the last 20 years, the present, and the future, what's coming up. And I read in an unusual way. I read with a great deal of detail. I'll tell you what the weather is like, what somebody will be wearing, about their parents, if they've ever been married before, if they have children, siblings, where they're originally from. It's pretty interesting, and I've found over the years pretty unique, because I don't paint with a broad brush. I paint in specifics. And because of that, I have clients all over the world. I've lived all over the world. And I work on murder cases and missing children cases all over the world. So my work, I always say, is the most interesting job in the world, because no people's lives are alike. No two people. Everybody's life is different.
Now, as I understand it, Karen, you basically, I believe you would put it this way, that you didn't choose to be a psychic. That was a choice that was made for you. Am I getting that right?
Yes, but not by a person.
Right.
Not by a person, but yes.
Yeah. Tell us about.
It was not a choice I made. I thought I was the normal one in my family.
And you weren't. Tell us about what it was like to be growing up with psychic abilities, and how you actually discovered what that was all about.
Well, in the words of that great sage, Lady Gaga, I was just born this way. And I had certainly not planned to be a psychic. My mother was highly intuitive. I had an aunt that was a reader that opened the first metaphysical center in Los Angeles on Western Avenue. And my sister was very, very psychic and read, and my mother's two closest friends were both readers. But they used different tools, and tools are anything a psychic uses to focus on the information. And I use usually what is called psychometry, which is a ring, watch, keys, a photograph, a business card. And to me, I thought I knew what a psychic was, because I'd grown up around it. It was so normal for me. And I was sure that I was not psychic, because I was the normal one in the family. And I was an excruciatingly shy child, which I know is hard to believe right now. And I had a terrible stutter all through elementary school. And I was the little girl that walked up to the front window at 3 years old of our house and said to my mother and Mommy, "Do you know that Mr. Wollensale beats his wife?" Staring at the house across the street. So it was always there for me, and mine manifested differently than anybody I knew. So I just thought that's the way I was, and everybody was that way. I thought everyone was like that.
How does this work? How is it that you are able to see the future for other people? How does this work?
Well, I think it's there for everybody, and I think everybody is psychic to a certain degree. I always say some people are psychic an inch, and some people are psychic 5 miles, you know. And I think that information of what is coming up is, and I'm not talking about the little things. I have the Karen Page theory about what is fated and what is free will. I always say that 20 to 40% of our life is fated, no matter what we do, what we choose, what we think we can change. Those things are going to happen because they are absolute. And that's God's plan for us when we're born and we come into this life, and we're going to have those experiences regardless. And the other 60 to 80% is kind of like Burger King, where you can have it your way. You know, it's free will, and you don't have to take that job or go on that trip or buy that car or date that person or whatever you don't feel like doing. That's free will. And I think that the fated things, the absolute 20 to 40% of our life, and I'm talking about really real psychics. I'm not talking about the gypsy on the pier psychics, not to offend the gypsies on the pier. But I'm talking about real psychics will see many of those same fated, absolute things that are going to occur along the journey in a person's life. It's an interpretation. So it's about being able to focus. It also is about being to get yourself out of the way, because a reading is never about me. It's about what's going on in my client's life. Whether I have many clients I have never met face to face for over 40 years. I have only read them over the phone. They live all over the world. And I still read for them, and now I read for their grown children, and the information is as clear as a bell as if they're standing in front of me. So it's about opening a channel in your mind, calming your mind, and getting your ego out of the way. It's never what I wish for somebody, because over the years, some of the things I've seen for people sound pretty crazy, but they happen. So it's being open to it and allowing the information to flow into you. I always say it comes in my head and goes out of my mouth, you know. So it's kind of hard to explain exactly how a reading happens, but it really is about focus and clarity and interpreting what someone sees.
You mentioned that you think everybody is psychic, some people to an inch, you know, some people much more than that.
Absolutely.
Are those abilities something we can develop? Because it seems to me, in my personal life, I honestly think and believe that my intuitive powers are much stronger now than they were, say, 30 years ago. I'm about in my mid-50s now. And as
right.
I was...
Because your mind is no longer cluttered up with what you think is important. You have a great deal more life experience than you had when you were in your 20s. So the things that you thought were important there and you just were going to focus on and put all your energy into, some of those things have either come to pass and you took care of them and did them, or let them go and moved along to other things that showed themselves to be more important in your life. So your mind is not cluttered up with what you think you want to do anymore, which at 20 is usually, you know, in our 20s, we think we know where we're going in our life. And in your mid-50s or as a grown-up, it's not cluttered up with the I'm going to, I want to, and I always call it the desire phase. It doesn't mean that you don't still want things and that you're not focused on certain, I'm going to say, earthly or material things, or think you know how to get to a certain destination or goal in your life. What it means is that you are more open and less attached to the ego. In our 20s, we think we know everything. And the truth is, we find out somewhere in our 50s that we really didn't know much of anything.
Yeah, I've had a few moments like that, I have to tell you. It seems to me that part of it is learning to listen, learning to recognize and listen, and especially recognizing, because when I was younger, those things would happen to me, but I didn't recognize it.
Well, when the information comes in, sometimes not recognizing it is an incredibly good point you're making. Our logical mind will take over. That's that ego part of ourselves. And our logical mind will take over and we'll say, oh, that's ridiculous, and we'll push it out, and not give it any credence. But the truth is, a lot of those things, that's when people talk about that gut feeling, that first instinct, that, gee, that's a great idea. Those things, I always say, fly out of the ether when your mind is open. That's why I think meditation is a great practice for people, because it calms your mind and leaves room for all of that. And when we can get the logic out of the way, it's like, I think more people would be connected with their intuition. And everybody's psychic and intuitive in some way. How many thousands of times over our lives do we think about somebody and then the phone rings, or we get an email, or somebody mentions them, there's contact made before it ever happens? That's no different. Mine is just magnified about 1,000 times.
We're visiting this afternoon with KYNT Page. She is the author of a book entitled Across the Table, Stories from a Psychic's Life. KYNT, your book has a number of very interesting stories in it. I wanted to take one of them today and visit with you a little bit about it. It's the chapter that you entitled The Bookie.
Oh, yes.
And I thought this was a very interesting story. Please relate it to us, if you would.
I had some very dear friends that were in the dental supply business. And I have, like I said to you earlier, if you met me, this is the last thing on the planet you'd think I do. And the caveat to that is, except for my extremely long fingernails, okay? And I've had very long fingernails for over 40 years, right? I stopped biting my nails and grew them, but in order to have natural nails that long, I keep them covered because I don't have the patience for gloves. So my friends owned a dental supply company. And I used to go and buy dental porcelain and cover my nails with them so they would be strong, right? And the husband said to me on a couple of different occasions that a neighbor of theirs in this little industrial park in the valley wanted a reading. And I said, oh, sure, one of these days, no problem. And one day I went to pick up the dental porcelain, and he said, let me call and see if my neighbor wants to have his reading and if he wants to meet you now. And I said, oh, sure, that'd be lovely. Thanks for the referral. So he calls, and the guy says, come over now, right? So we go into the guy's place, and he is in the electrical supply business. And there are all these stanchions set up on an angle at exactly the same distance apart. And it is the neatest place I've ever seen in my life for an electrical supply company. And it just kind of made my flesh crawl, okay? But none of my business. They know them. They know this guy, so we're going to go in. So we walk to the back, and a gentleman comes out that looks very grandfatherly in his buttoned-up cardigan and not very tall and a little chubby. And he introduces himself, and my friends say, okay, you guys, we'll leave you alone now. And we go in his office, and he opens the door with a flourish and points me to a chair, and I sit down, and he waits until I'm seated in my chair for him to go and lock the door, but to make sure that I see him lock the door in the office. And he looked me right in the eyes when he was doing it, and I went, oh dear, I'm in trouble. And I look around his office, and it's all glass, and I said to him, bulletproof? He said, aren't you a smart girl? He said, all of it. So I said to him, do you want to do your reading? And he said, absolutely. So I do his reading, and I talk about his family and his kids and his grandkids and his wife and his health and his siblings. And I finish, and I said, is there anything else you'd like to know? And he said, I want to talk about my business. And that was exactly what I didn't want to talk about. I looked at him and I said, what business would that be? Because we both know you're not in the electrical supply business. And he said, pretty much told me that he was the biggest booking on the West Coast and that he took the bets for everybody. And he wanted to talk to me about sports. And I said to him, oh, well, that's easy. I can't help you because I don't know anything about sports. He said, sure you do. I want you to pick the games for me. And I said to him, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, sure you do. And he pulls a slip of paper out of his desk drawer and waves a pen in front of my face. And I wound up picking the games. And at the time, I was supporting my mother, and I was not making a lot of money, and it was a very, very difficult time financially in my life. And, excuse the expression, he made me an offer I couldn't refuse at the time. I said to him, one season. So the agreement was that I would pick the games for one season. He would pay me the agreed-upon amount for every game. He would have somebody deposit the money in my mailbox every morning before he called. And that's what we did. And to him, he called me up afterwards and asked me if I would do it again. And he would double the money. I said to him, absolutely not. He said, but you made me a lot of money. He said, you made me more money than I've ever made in the years I've been in this business, and I'm a professional. He said, for a girl that doesn't know anything about sports, you did a pretty amazing job. And to him, it was a business proposition. To me, it was an ethical and moral decision for me. I could barely live with myself for having done it. And I would never do anything like it. I would never do it or anything like it ever again. This man sent a thug to my house every morning to drop money off in my mailbox. And my work is never about business and never about money for me, and never has been. And yes, it's a business, and it's how I make a living, but I don't charge for murder cases, I don't charge for missing children cases, and I wouldn't take a dime ever again to do something that is ethically or morally opposed just for money.
You know, I can certainly hear in your voice, I think, a certain amount of regret over this thing.
Oh, it was devastating to me.
And that really came out in reading that portion of the book as well, that, you know, and we've all, Karen, we've all got those parts of our lives that if I could go back and make a different decision, I would. But in your particular case, I guess to use another cliche, this was the deal with the devil that you made, and
yes.
You lived up to it.
Yes, and I said I lived up to my agreement with him because I always live up to my agreements, but I am only human. And that was a lesson for me that he had no idea what price I paid for making that choice to work with him. And I would never do it again. I have turned clients away because I simply don't want to read for them. And you know, it's not about the money. Do I need to make a living? Yes. But my work is about an exchange between people. But I would never do it again. Not ever, and nothing like it. Ever again. I wouldn't care what they offered me.
One of the thoughts that has occurred to me as I was taking a look at your book and visiting with you here this afternoon is, when you perform a reading for someone, have you had the experience of, how can I put this, of learning bad news, I guess, things that you may not really want to tell this person, but yet this is what you are learning about them, this is what they're paying you to do. How do you handle that? Is that something that happens? And if so, how do you handle that type of situation?
Well, every once in a while, and I think bad news is relative, you know. I would rather somebody tell me the truth, and I may not, as I always say, be the most delicate flower in the garden, but as my mom used to say about me, if you don't want to know the truth, don't ask Karen, you know. And sometimes it is made very clear to me when I go into the reading that if there is most 99% of the time, if somebody is going to die, whether it's their mother, father, brother, husband, wife, whoever it is, it comes up to tell them, and I will tell them. But every once in a while, and I can count on less than a hand in over 40 years, how many times it has been made very clear to me not to tell them, that they need to go through the journey, the experience of this, without foreknowledge. So, and once in a while I am pushed to tell them when I have no choice, because they are going to change the destiny that they are supposed to be living. And when I say change the destiny, they're going to take the wrong road and not have the experience that they should have and gain the lessons from it if they do not know. So I'm forced to tell them. But it is a tiny, tiny fraction of times that has happened over the years. But 95% of the time, 99% of the time or more, I will tell people difficult news because that's real life. And it's not my right to cherry pick the information that they are told. It's their life, not mine. And they have a right to know. That's why they come to me.
You've spoken several times today about the concept of destiny, and I'm curious, are you convinced that as human beings we are predestined to do certain things while we're here on this earth?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're predestined to have certain experiences so that our soul will have the opportunity to learn those lessons, to make appropriate choices during those experiences so that our soul grows. So absolutely, I think that there is we all have different lessons we're supposed to experience, and I think this is a great big classroom, you know? And the one experience that every single one of us human beings will share is we are all going to die. But it's the journey for however long we are here that comes with a little packet that God gives us when we're born of lessons we're supposed to learn along the way. And how we choose to integrate those losses and joy and tears and happiness and integrate those experiences into our lives is our choice. but we cannot ever avoid those. They're going to happen no matter what.
Karen, it's been a fascinating conversation here with you today. Our time has just gone by far too fast.
Oh, wow.
If we have a listener out there today that would like to take a look at your website, perhaps get a copy of your book, how can they go about doing that?
Well, my website is KYNT.com, and the book, My Life Across the Table, is available at all Barnes & Noble, barnesandnoble.com, and on Amazon. And pretty much you can find it all over the Internet. It's available for download, or you can actually buy a physical book.
That's almost scary these days in the electronic age. Somebody asked me if I thought libraries would be around in 10 to 15 years recently, and I had to tell them, yeah, I think so. People are still going to want to read.
Oh, it's funny. When I first started writing the book, a friend of mine said, what if you don't find a publisher? Will you self-publish? And I said, no. She said, well, you can always put it on, online to download. And I said, I want a physical book. I want a physical book because I think it's wonderful to have downloadable, the option to have downloadable. But boy, there's nothing like a physical book.
I'm with you.
Yeah. I'm on that committee.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say it to you like this, but I hope you'll chuckle, because I describe myself as being a member of the 8-track tape generation, and I think you're probably one of those people too.
Oh, I'm the girl that still says to people, because I tell everyone I want them to record their reading because of all the details in it. And I'll say to them, if you bring a 90 or 120-minute blank cassette tape.
Yeah.
So, yes, I am.
Well, Karen, I want to thank you for spending some time with us here this afternoon. It's been a lot of fun visiting with you, and to wish you the very best in your continued work.
Thank you so much, David. This was absolutely a pleasure.
Very good. Karen Page joining us here this afternoon on Alive at 5. She is the author of My Life Across the Table, Stories from a Psychic's Life.